I have to start by saying I am so moved by Emmanuel's testimony, and I feel, I don't know what the right word is, just inadequate being following him, because my life is very different. I didn't experience that, what you did, and even my mother, as I'll talk about, managed to escape, but went through a lot, but nothing closely. I did write a book, actually, a book that I should have mentioned in my bio. I wrote a book about a Holocaust survivor, Michael Edelstein, called Live Another Day, and Michael's story is your story is in so many ways reminiscent, and his message also was that he would, he wouldn't give them that victory, and that's how he survived. He was also a child. But talking about my own mother, so I guess part of what I'm doing here is sharing with you all, and these, seeing so many people from Africa and telling you a little bit about that Jewish experience, that the death of 6 million in the Holocaust, and my mother being a survivor. So I'll tell you a little about her, and then how her trauma kind of affected me, what she went through. So she was born in Berlin in 1924, and her father actually was a wealthy manufacturer of men's coats, I believe. And she says that she remembers when Hitler was coming to power that they would have elections all the time, and then suddenly he was in power. She was, I guess, 8 years old at that time. Her life didn't change so much right at the beginning. She was forced to leave her public school and was sent to a Jewish school. So that, and the family wasn't that religious, but that was just because Jews were not allowed to be anymore with non-Jews. So she was in that Jewish school, which was actually a Zionist school, and it was called the Theodor Herzl School. Theodor Herzl was the founder of the Zionist movement. So she was very, felt strongly about, she wanted to go to Palestine. It was not yet Israel, and some of you may know the history, but I'd be happy to talk more about it. But she wanted to go. Her father was planning actually to go there, and he was putting money aside. He had to be very careful, but they were already talking about leaving. The thing was that my mother's mother, Ellie, did not want to go there because she said she actually had been quite a wealthy lady. She always wore gloves, and she said, "I'm not going to go be a pioneer in some desert," So, so she wanted to go somewhere else in Europe or maybe to America. But anyway, to make a long story short, her father was saving this money, and he was preparing, I guess, to go in 1938, late in the second half. But he went on a vacation, a supposed vacation. He was going to a spa in Czechoslovakia called Marienbad. He would do that every year, so he didn't want the Nazis to think he was planning something else. So he was going along his normal routine, because he was being watched. In fact, they had put somebody into the company, was watching the money, also the government, the Nazi government. But he had ways of kind of putting some money aside and to get for them to flee, for he and his wife and his one daughter to flee. So while he was on that vacation, unfortunately he got very sick and died of blood poisoning. The story happens. Nobody knows exactly why, but they didn't have penicillin yet, so he died. And so basically, and the next thing that happened after they found out he was dead, my mother and her mother, my mother then being about 14, was that his business partner, who was Jewish, then took a lot of the money that was left and fled himself. He fled the country with the money, and he sort of, instead of, it should have been their money, but anyway, he did that. So he got out of the country. So then they were in a really tough spot, and my grandmother, it was always interesting because I knew her very well, and she was always she wasn't any more a white gloves lady at that point after what she'd been through, but just to think about how she kind of pulled it together, because he was the one who did everything. She was more like a traditional wife, or she wasn't really, somehow she made all the connections. And so what happened was, their story, how they got out of Germany, was that they made arrangements basically to bribe the Gestapo, which I guess was not, one doesn't read about this very much, in fact, when you read about the Holocaust, but what happened was they got into a Gestapo, which was the German secret police, got into a Gestapo car in Munich, and they were driven 400 miles to the border of Belgium. And that was on special military roads where they were not allowed to, only official official military cars were allowed there, or police. And they had to lie down, my mother and grandmother, so it was a big car, I guess, and they lay down on the back seat so they wouldn't be seen. And just before, I guess, evening, she said it was just getting dark, the car suddenly pulled over, and he said, and the Gestapo guy said, you run across that field over there, and you run until you see somebody waving a white handkerchief, and when that happens, then you'll know you're in Belgium already. So they did. I asked my mother, I interviewed my mother just before she died. I mean, she always told me these stories, but I remember the last interview, I said, what were you feeling at that moment as you were running across that field? And she said, first of all, we didn't know they could shoot us in the back. Maybe they would just shoot us in the back, but we just, it was just, I was on autopilot. I was, just staying alive, one more step to stay alive, and sure enough, they saw the guy with the white handkerchief and they thought they were okay. But that was just the very beginning, actually, of the story. I mean, they were out of Germany, but he was it was a smuggler's ring, so they took them to some farmhouse there, several smugglers, and they extorted almost all the money they had on them. They extorted all this extra money, and they threatened to rape my grandmother if she didn't, they didn't give the money. And so somehow they got through that, and then the smugglers said to them that you're going to have to walk for three nights, because you have to get all the way to the city of Liège, which was about 50 kilometers, from the border. If the Belgian police will catch you somewhere along the way, they'll send you back to Germany. So they managed to do that. They would sleep, they would lie in the farmhouse all day, and they would walk at night, and eventually they got to Liège. Then they were sort of safe for a while. They went to Antwerp, and eventually down into France. They moved to France, and they went to the city of Nice, down in the south of France. So my mother used to say, well, it was a very beautiful place, but we knew we were in peril because we knew that war was coming. 1939, and then the war started, but the point was they couldn't take the next step. They wanted either to get to Palestine or to the United States. Those were the two options. But Palestine was being blockaded by the British, British were colonizers of Palestine, and some of you may know, they got kind of caught between the Jews and the Palestinians, were both trying to say this is our land. The British at this point blockaded, would not allow any Jewish emigration in at the moment when it was needed the most. So that was impossible. Coming to America was impossible because of anti-Semitism. The United States government had in 1924, put very restrictive quotas on most immigration of anyone who wasn't kind of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, but Jews were definitely not. And they would go to the U.S. consulate and they said, oh, we'll put you're on a waiting list, but nothing was happening. And then the Nazis come to France, they conquer France. They come down, so they just conquer the north of France, but their agents, the Gestapo and all these people come down into the south of France. They're trying to round up Jews. And at one point, my mother says she and her mother, they were sitting in a cafe in the city of Lyon. They were trying to get into Switzerland. And they saw some Gestapo guy. He's sitting there reading the newspaper. They knew him from Berlin. He used to watch them. And unfortunately, he's looking this way, and they're back here, right? So, and they ran out of that, and that. And my grandmother said, so then the thing was to get to Lisbon, Portugal. That was like a way out, maybe. At least you could get that far. So they used their last money. They fortunately had some money still, some of it sent by my great-grandmother from Berlin, who herself had refused to leave. She said, I'm a German, I'll never leave. But she sent them that money. They used it to buy a visa to a kind of fake, it wasn't a fake visa, it was being from this country of Ecuador. So that, this Ecuadorian consulate, whatever, would stamp them, here, give me, $10,000 or whatever for this visa. And that made it possible for them to get to Lisbon, to Portugal. So now they were stuck there for another 9 months, and they couldn't, because the U.S. consulate was said, you're on a waiting list, you're on a waiting list. So finally what they did something very desperate. They were being helped by an organization called HIAS, a Jewish organization that was helping get people over here from American Jewish organizations. So what HIAS did, basically, they took a boat from Lisbon to New York, but they had no right to stay in New York. They were then supposed to get on a boat to Ecuador. And but when they got to New York, somebody was waiting for them from Hyas, and he took my grandmother and her sister, who was with them. So there are two grown-up ladies went with this guy into the city, and they found somebody with the same last name who signed an affidavit saying that these are my relatives. The interesting thing is a really interesting piece of history. We don't know the answer. This guy was actually a judge in New York City, a New York State judge of some kind, appeals judge or something. And he obviously knew they weren't his relatives, but he himself signed it, even though, you know, he's a judge. He's not supposed to, you know, he was breaking the law by saying that, you know, anyway. But that was what made it possible for them to stay. So that was how my mother got to America, and then I'm born in 1950. And I'll just tell you a little bit more. I hope I'm not running over time. But about me and my life and her and my mother, growing up with my mother. So my mother was a wonderful, wonderful person. I mean, she became totally American. First of all, she would never speak German again for the rest of her life. She hated it. She hated the sound of the language, and she just wanted to be American. But she was also very progressive in her values, and she and my father raised us as, you know, liberals, you know, we supported civil rights and anti-Vietnam and all of that. She was part of that too. And I inherited that in the 60s and 70s. But, and she inspired people. I mean, she was really a great mentor to young people outside of our family, right? But to many of my sister's friends. The thing was that inside the family, that's where she had a lot of trauma and a lot of anxiety, incredible amount of anxiety. So growing up with her, you know, you would see all the positive sides, and then suddenly she would do something a little crazy, like when we'd, you know, come down to breakfast 5 minutes late, she would kind of throw a huge tantrum out of nowhere. I mean, things like that, which made no sense. And then she would run into her bedroom and cry for about an hour, and then she would come back out and say, okay, let's have breakfast. You know, that happened I don't know how many times. And so she was, you know, so it was very hard for me because, and then I felt that she didn't, you know, that she took a lot of it out on me. I was the oldest son. I don't know, there were a lot of things that went on, but it made me, I was never able to be very close to her as I wish I could have been. You know, now I look back, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why she would be behaving that way. It was just like, okay, well, I mean, I knew her stories, you know, I knew where, but I didn't put two and two together. You know, when you look back and you say, how stupid could I have been? And then I had a lot of issues about being Jewish when I was a kid. And this may interest you because, you know, a lot of, you know, in those days we felt, when I was a kid, I thought, you know, Jews, you know, when I learned about the Holocaust from her and then reading books, and I was 8, 9 years old, I would say, wow, we're so weak. We're just like, there was a line that the Jews went like lambs to the slaughter, you know. They didn't, according to that thing, they didn't fight back the way you did in Rwanda, but of course that wasn't true. They fought back in the Warsaw Ghetto, they fought back wherever they could, but that was the image. And then there was this joke that I'll never forget, that that I heard around that time. It said, it was like a joke, and the joke was, how many Jews can you fit into a Volkswagen, a German car? So, you know, I don't know. So the correct answer is 6. 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and 2 in the ashtray. So that was the kind of stuff I grew up with. And so I thought, like, you know, I was ashamed of being Jewish. I said, oh, we're so weak, we're so... But then my parents took me when I was 12 years old to live in Israel for a year, and it was completely the opposite, you know. My father just had a sabbatical year over there, and you know, they were so strong and confident and self-confident, and I just fell in love with there. I wanted to stay there, but my mother did not want to stay. Well, my father would have stayed, but my mother said, no, I'm not gonna let my, you know, my mother's line was, I didn't survive Hitler so that my 2 sons can be killed in the war, in Israel's wars. And so she's the one who got us to return to the States. Anyway, a lot of stuff. I ended up, though, going back to Israel when I was in my 20s. I loved being there. And I was a journalist. I started working as a journalist. But eventually I left again because I think first of all, I was not willing to go in the army. I just, you know, couldn't be part of that. I felt I had been anti-Vietnam. I wasn't going to go get involved in another kind of killing. And then I was very offended by the treatment of Palestinians. I covered it as a journalist. I was able to see what was really going on. And eventually, but when I came back to the States, I was a journalist for Jewish and Israeli newspapers, as it says in the bio, for many years. And I covered the peace process during the 90s between Israel and the Palestinians. I believed in it. It all fell apart in the early 2000s. And that's when I got involved in Jewish-Muslim relations, because I said, at least we need to do something to keep that poison from coming over here. And it was a wonderful, wonderful period of my life, the last 15, 20 years. Tragically, I just would conclude, on October 7th, as you all know, 2023, the conflict, began with the attack by Hamas on Israel, which left 1,200 or something Jews killed, Israeli Jews, and it felt to many Jews, including me, like it was like the Holocaust was happening again. The way it happened, where they stormed out, they went into house to house, and they were slaughtering people. The imagery again, some of what Emmanuel shared. So it brought all of that Holocaust trauma back, and then Israel has behaved in I think, horrible way since then. But I understand where the trauma comes from. I mean, having lived it myself. And so we stand today in a really terrible situation. And of course, it's hurt Jewish Muslim relations too here in America. A lot of the work that I've been doing has been, it's just feel like it's come back undone. So, but as you said, Emmanuel, we have to be strong and go on and keep fighting. So I'll stop there. And anyone, thank you so much. Does anyone any questions? If not, I will be.
I have one question.
Oh, sure.
Can you tell us exactly, back in Germany, about what your mom told you?
Yeah.
How Germans, France, had to make a difference between the Jews and the non-Jews? Because in Rwanda, there was an identity card between Tutsi.
Yes.
Now, it's a question where you look white. For me, you are a white man.
I know.
So how they made the distinction between the Jews and non-Jews? Because for us, it's so strange.
Yes. That's really, really interesting. So I don't remember my mother talking to me about non-Jewish friends, not being, having broken with her, although maybe that happened. I wish I remembered. I mean, I wish, I'd gotten more information from her. But how did they make the distinction? I mean, that's a good. I mean, I guess there were always people who could probably pass, but it was just that, you were officially registered as, as being Jewish, so it was, I don't know how, that's a good question. So some people, there were stories of, especially Jewish kids during the Holocaust actually being saved by Gentile families, maybe not in Germany, but more in Poland and other countries like that. And if the kids happened to be blonde, and because Jews are usually dark-haired, right? And I used to be dark-haired. What happened? But I have Jewish friends who were blonde, but apparently, so I think this guy who became the head of the Anti-Defamation League, I remember him telling me his story, Abe Foxman, but anyway, Abe apparently as a kid was he was raised by a Catholic family in Poland and saved, and I guess he was blonde, so I don't know. I mean, if one of the things, of course, was circumcision. So if it came to that, then they could always find out, I guess. Because
maybe a follow-up question.
Sure.
Regarding the history. Maybe you have been so discriminated for long, to the extent that the community of the Jews in Germany have to create a kind of ecosystem to survive. And therefore, so you have a system where you create your own businesses, just to survive,
Yeah.
okay? And therefore, as a result, you became isolated. So you are protecting yourself, but in the extent, you become isolated.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Creating a business
Yeah.
network
Yeah.
of Jewish to survive, and it take decades to extend that everybody else say, oh, these people,
Thank you.
So,
they are different.
Okay.
right,
Yeah.
Right.
So, but ecosystem
yeah,
to survive.
that's right. Well, thank you. That's a really good point. I think if you look at if you look at the Jewish experience in the diaspora, we say, over 2,000 years, 2,000 years ago exactly, the Roman Empire drove the Jews out of their homeland. And so the whole story of Israel is we're going to go back to our homeland, we're going to be strong, we're going to be independent. But for 2,000 years, we were living everywhere, in every country, and it depended kind of how we were being treated. But for most of that period, unfortunately, the church, the Christian church in Europe for most of that period basically said, you Jews killed Jesus. That was, and therefore, it wasn't just those Jews 2,000 years ago killed Jesus. It means you, me, I killed Jesus. That was how they saw it. And so, and then there would be all of these, what we call pogroms, attacks on the Jews in every country, obviously, not just Germany, every country in Europe, pretty much, because of that. And as a result, the Jews were living for most of that period in isolation, as you say. They were either doing it to protect themselves, or they were forced. For example, this word ghetto. The word ghetto comes from Venice, where they still have you can see the ghetto in Venice. That was the first place. So the thing about the ghetto is the Jews they had to live in the ghetto, right? And they could go out during the day, but they had to be back by whatever, 7 o'clock p.m., whatever it was. So they were forced to live like that by the Christians, and not only in Venice. Venice was one of the more liberal places. But eventually, in the 19th century and then into the 20th century, that was abolished. It was like, you can come out now. Hey, you can be, Napoleon said, you can be citizens of France as long as you say that the most important thing is being French and not Jewish. So you had to be, but basically they were allowed out of the ghetto, and many Jews, came out of the ghetto, and then they threw away a lot and said, I don't want to be isolated. I want to be a human being, So that's my basic life credo. My life is all about dealing with this conflict between being a human being and being a Jew. Because after they let us out of the ghetto, all of a sudden they decided to kill us again. Hitler said, Hitler comes up and suddenly, and he was saying, we let these, cockroaches out of the ghetto. They should be, which, we were literally called, cockroaches. So anyway.
So with that, we're going to transition.
Thank you.
Although I knew that there was a last question back there. Is it burning that you need to ask it? Or we can wait. But go ahead.
Okay.
Final question. We'll just
Thanks.
make it short.
Yeah, as a writer and also a son of a survivor,
Yeah.
what is genocide, and also what does peace means today?
Very good question. I don't know, there's definitions of what is genocide, and obviously the question, right now it's very sharp because of what's happening in Gaza. Are we the Jews now committing a genocide against another people? And I have to tell you that for me, even though I'm horrified by what's been happening in Gaza, I haven't been able to use the word genocide for my own people. Because for me, when you say, and for most Jews, the vast majority of Jews, if you say, you guys are committing genocide against the Palestinians, we take it as, oh, so you're saying, so it's kind of like saying the Jews killed Jesus. So now you're saying that we're just as bad as the Nazis. That's how we take it. And I have to admit that I myself, I stood up in my hometown in Frederick, Maryland, and because there was some resolution accusing Israel of genocide, and I said, I can't, you know, if you want to say ethnic cleansing going on, yes, but I cannot hear, the word genocide is inadmissible. It's a, but I can't logically defend that now. I'm beginning to feel that, and that we are doing that. And the only thing that I can say is, of course, that tragically many nations have committed genocide. It's not only the Nazis, it's America to African Americans and certainly to the Native Americans. And it's many, many countries, and many countries, European colonizers, and we know, we've just heard the story of Rwanda. So it's not that, or because of what the Turks did to the Armenians. So we're not the only ones, but tragically there we are. And abused people do grow up to be abusers. That's part of the story. So that's where I'm at.
Well, I know I see another hand, but that's the last one. Thank you very much. And there'll be an opportunity to ask questions and so forth. I know I'm supposed to stand over, but I'm going to use the mic here, and I'm going to introduce Safari Miyaru Gendo. He was born and raised in his home territory of Rutshuru, the current province of North Kivu in the DR Congo. He was an educator in Goma in 1983, taught African history, and gathered oral traditional stories that were shared by elders in the community. I will leave it to you to read the rest, but just note that he's currently serving as the president of Isoko USA, a US-based nonprofit organization advocating against discrimination, hate speech, and xenophobia tendencies against Tutsi ethnic group in DR Congo. Isoko USA organization promotes education, culture, and traditions among Congolese diaspora and interconnection with other ethnic groups from the DRC living in the USA. Since 2022, our organization, he said, his organizations have altered the world leaders, most in the US administration, and UN advocating for the protection, the endangered minority groups, victims in the DRC based on their cultural identity. So join me in welcoming Mr. Miyaru Gendo.